Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited that we're all here to glean some wisdom from Mark Silver, who I will introduce in a moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eryka Peskin, and right now I'm in Boise, Idaho, on the unceded and stolen lands of the Shoshone-Bannock Nations. Please feel free to share where you are in the chat, the commonly known name as well as the indigenous lands that you might be on. And if you don't know, here's a resource that you can find out. Um, so, a little bit about me and the perspective that I'm coming from. I am a multi-passionate life coach. I work with people on limiting beliefs and fears, on money and confidence and a whole bunch of other stuff. Um, I'm a landscape photographer and a body positive portrait photographer. I'm a writer of romance and nonfiction, and I train coaches and healers and consultants on being trauma informed practitioners. So, yeah, multi passionate. Um, and I had the idea to do book chats like this towards the end of lockdown when people started doing things in person again. But, I'm a New Yorker living in Boise, Idaho, so there aren't that many people coming here. And so I missed and still wanted to attend readings and fun things. And it took me a little bit, but I finally started making it happen. So, Mark, thank you for helping me make this happen. And enough about me. A little bit about how today is going to go. I'm going to introduce the fabulous Mark. He's going to do some readings from his book, Heart Centered Business, Healing from Toxic Business Culture so your small business can thrive. As a small business owner, I support all of that. Um, and I'll ask some questions and then we'll open it up to Q&A from you all. This is being recorded. Yes, I did that. And the recording will live on YouTube for others to be able to watch and access. So if there's something that you want to share, but you would prefer that it not be on the recording, please feel free to message me on the chat and I will do what I can to take care of you. So Mark Silver! Yay! Um, so since 1999, Mark Silver has worked with heart-centered entrepreneurs to help them realize that every act of business can be an act of love. Mark is one of the pioneers in integrating real spirituality with the nitty-gritty of small business. As a coach, teacher, and spiritual healer, he has facilitated thousands of individual sessions with entrepreneurs and has led hundreds of classes, seminars, groups, and retreats. His weekly writings and teachings are followed by thousands of people around the globe. And, Mark is obviously the awesomest of sauce. And I am so glad and honored to be sharing this time with him and with all of you. So, welcome, Mark. Yay!
Thank you. I so appreciate being here and that you making this space for this. I will admit that this is the very first book reading I've done. The book came out almost a year ago, and I did all kinds of we did all kinds of things to get the word out, but I didn't do any book readings. So I was just like, it was just not. I don't fully understand it myself. So I'm like, oh wow, maybe I could do it this coming year. So thank you for opening the door to that. Um,
Wow, it's
and
exciting.
yeah, so I'm excited about this. Um, uh, this book, I don't even know if I should try to introduce the book or if I should. I guess I'm a little bit. Oh, thanks, Rana. Um, uh, yeah, I guess I'm feeling a little bit like, oh yeah, how should this do? Should I just jump in and read it? I think I should, because I think the first section is I wanted to read is actually from the introduction about why this book exists, and I think it brings in some important framing that that I just want to have as kind of a groundwork for any conversation we might have. And
That sounds great.
so I guess I'll just start by reading. Yes. And it's about 2 pages, this particular section. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the more than 20 years I've worked with clients on their businesses, the most common reason I've seen people stop is to avoid something that threatens to jeopardize their integrity. If it compromises their sense of truth, goodness, and wholeness, they just won't do it. Business culture is so toxic and affects us so profoundly that many people struggle to create an ethical business that feels great to their heart and also thrives. I see the disconnect all the time when people with incredible skills and huge hearts nevertheless get caught up unconsciously in recreating terrible scorched earth business and marketing strategies. Or, more commonly, they avoid marketing at all and their business stagnates. This book exists, my work exists, because healing is necessary in the world of business and in individuals who wish to be in business. I say healing quite deliberately because strategies, tactics, even working on changing mindsets and belief don't quite get at what I think many of us intuitively know is really needed. What is healing? Again, because of a dysfunctional culture, many are reluctant to use the word healing, or when they do, they often think of it as an individual process. In a sense, this is correct. There are individual aspects to the journey. But healing, as my teachers taught me, is about melting the illusion of separation. It's about coming into wholeness. Yes, that includes individual wholeness, but it also means a collective wholeness. This wholeness in ourselves and between each other means we do things that support thriving. And we do this without harming others, including people, animals, and the world around us, from which we aren't separate. That wholeness arises out of love. In this culture, love is often talked about as soft, nice, comforting. But the Sufis, those mystical servants of the heart, talk about the annihilating power of love. Love, if it were unleashed with strength, wisdom, and compassion, would annihilate the world of business as it is, turning it into something entirely different. If love had its way, business could be part of a culture and society that lifts us up and serves us all. That's what I believe is needed. An annihilation that heals our hearts, heals the world of business, heals us in our relationships around how we make our livelihood, and helps us to share our gifts in the world. As much as we need collective healing, we also at the same time need personal healing. This book will help you walk into personal healing around business in a way that supports collective healing. We do this healing by discerning between what is truly harmful, which we avoid, and what is uncomfortable, where we can lean in and find the love that has been hidden or distorted. This is how we learn and implement the details of developing a business that is an expression of that love.
Mm, that was so beautiful, Mark.
Mm.
Do you want to talk about that, or do you want to go into your next excerpt?
Well, I think we can pause. I think if anyone has questions or if you have questions, would it be better to discuss each thing as I read it and then go into the next one, or to kind of unload them all and then have a big mix?
Well, I will tell you that I basically underlined everything in your in your introduction. Um,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I have not read many business books that weren't like super boring, and just about like this is how you handle money and all that other stuff. And also really that talked also that talked about integrity other than in like, don't lie. Don't be a liar or making space for the discomfort. And so I loved that that was how you framed it. Like that's the beginning. This is the intro to this book. It is about healing. It is about melting illusions and creating wholeness. So it's a good place to start. How
Well,
did it
thank
feel
you.
to start off that way? Or I imagine that you wrote it after the intro after you wrote the whole book.
I did. It's so funny because I will share that my wife Holly, we've been together for 30 years. She's an amazingly powerful, wonderful person, and my best friend and a partner in the business. And we do things so differently. And she's like, "You got to write an introduction." I'm like, "Why do I have to write an introduction? I never read introductions. Why? I don't understand." She's like, "You don't read introductions?" I'm like, "No, I just jump into the book. Like, what's the introduction? It feels like a parenthesis. I mean, like, why not just jump into it?" That's the kind of person I am. Like, I'm the person who doesn't read directions. I'll just like open up the package and dig in, and like I like getting my hands on things. And Rana knows Holly, so that's anyway. So I'm just and she's like, "You have to write an introduction." And I'm like, "What the heck do I even say in an introduction?" Like I don't. And so I had to go into deep prayer, and to ask, and suffice to say that I've really come to appreciate introductions, um, and uh, and the importance of like the framing that's needed, that's like creating the container for what is in the book. And I think that the thing that might be worthwhile expanding on is just that you know I've done there's been a lot of historical reading I've read about, a reading I've done about ec- economy and business and commerce and trade and things, and that commerce and trade have been around humanity for a very, very, very long time. And capitalism has not. Capitalism is an extremely new um, creation, only a few hundred years old. And it's a particularly kind of cancerous and toxic way of organizing how we do, what could be called indirect trading, or, like there's a lot of different ways to talk about commerce. And I want people to understand that it's not like reactions that we have around business are legitimate. So much, yes, racialized capitalism, absolutely. Um, I mean, capitalism and white supremacy are woven together. You can't separate them. Capitalism arose out of white supremacy. White supremacy rose out of and contributed to capitalism. I mean, it's the growth and strength of capitalism um, made a huge leap, um, basically from colonialism and stolen lands and stolen people and stolen wealth, and it's like it's just a toxic mess. And um and so yeah and so I want people to understand that, like, one of the main themes in the book is that we can trust ourselves, we can trust our heart, and that the culture wants to our dystopian culture wants to push personal responsibility onto every individual and away from the systems and the institutions that are so destructive. And this is not to say that there isn't such a thing as personal responsibility. Of course there is. Um, so I think that we want to embrace places where we can claim sovereignty and strength, but we also really need to trust that, yeah, if we're reacting to business, it's because there's something to react to.
Mm, that is so powerful, Mark. And also, just synchronistically, I guess, the module that we're doing in trauma informed coaching and healing is systemic, collective, and generational ancestral trauma. And, like many Western societies are based in rugged individualism, so blaming the individual for things that actually might be rooted in these systemic issues. And I know personally, like, I have blamed myself for my, perceived lack of success. Like I'm not a six-figure owner, six-figure business, whatever, earner. That's the word I'm looking for. I'm not a six-figure business earner right now. And like, it's all my fault, you know, rather than, huh, maybe there are some other things at play here. Like maybe there are things that patriarchy has taught me about speaking up or, capitalism and so forth. And again, like it's not like, and also neurodivergence as well, which I'm only recently coming to understand might be at play
Mm,
here. Um, and I think that's just such an important thing to realize that there's like a lot of systemic shit that, oh, I'm profane too. I should have mentioned that in the beginning when I was introducing myself. I mean, maybe you don't care, but maybe others do. Um, but like, there's a lot of stuff at play that can really impact how we do our businesses, do our marketing, and I love that your first lesson, and maybe you'll read about this, is like to come at everything with love. And what is the lesson of love that we can learn? Or is there love to be found here? Is love available here?
mhm.
So, and compassion.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so Jen says this shares literally the question about what Mark said before. This shares literally the question I just wrote down to explore more. Why did businesses first start? Survival to now desire to build a business from the heart will take much healing and perspective shifts. Yes, absolutely. Um,
So I think it's an interesting share, Jen. Thank you so much for writing that, because I think that like in our culture, like the need to earn our living is, to survive, especially in the US where there's hardly any social net at all. Um, I don't think that in the history of people having different ways of, you know, having commerce, I don't think it was always like survival. I think that there have been many ways that not always, and there's plenty of examples to the contrary, but there's also plenty of ways that human beings have organized cultures where people are cared for, and then there is self-expression on top of that. And so it's not always like pure survival that starts the business. And so I think that, but in our culture, yes. And I like to keep opening that frame so that we can understand that other things are possible. Because capitalism and our culture, I think like most, monolithic cultures, likes to pretend that, oh, well, this is just the way things naturally are. This wasn't designed or created. It just kind of organically grew, and this is how the world works. And it's not. Like there have been a series of choices made um, by some very powerful people that put some very miserable structures in place, and we really can do it differently. If you're interested in exploring that, Jen, there's David Graeber. Do I have it over here? Yes. Um, One of the books that I think is really interesting. I don't know if you've heard of David Graeber. He died relatively recently, and but he wrote this book, Debt: The First 5,000 Years, and it's a really fascinating book. And he's just does a tremendous amount of scholarship around this is around economics. And then he and a colleague of his wrote a book before they actually both passed relatively close to one another, and it's called The History of Everything. And they were exploring where did injustice arise? Like, why do we create a culture that basically is so unjust? And it's a huge read, but it challenges a lot of assumptions that get promoted by the culture. And there's plenty of other books that he's one author, and but I think it's a worthwhile. I think the study of history is a worthwhile pursuit, if we're trying to open our hearts to other possibilities.
hmm. Thank you for those
Hmm.
resources. Um, Another great resource on this and the differences between commerce and capitalism and how they all came about is a course that I actually took with Anuradha Kowtha called Sowing Post-Capitalist Seeds.
She's amazing.
And yeah, they are amazing.
Thank you.
Sure. Um, and really, I learned so much. I mean, I was raised by like communists and and I didn't know half of um, what was in the course, so it was really amazing. And I'll make sure to include that in the materials and in the email that goes out after, as well as the books that Mark just mentioned. Um, so let's see. Rona says, I was recently in awe of seeing how an indigenous community and family came together to support a young one's funeral ceremony. Within literal minutes, all needs were met and not one mention of money. Mm, yeah,
So much possible.
yeah. One of the things that I really loved about Anuradha's course was that they really drew a distinction between capitalism and commerce, which I had never really conceptualized before. And I really love that about your book as well, Mark. Like you draw that distinction too. Um, and I don't know if that's going to be the next bit that you read, but
Not necessarily. There's a lot. It's
there's
not
a lot in
that
it.
huge a book, but there's a good bit in there, and I can't read the whole thing. Um, should I move on to the next piece,
Yeah, sure.
or is there more that people want to? I guess we can always circle back around.
Yeah, let's circle back.
Mm,
Oh, thanks for popping that
mhm.
um, in the chat, Rana. Yeah, read more.
All right. Okay. So there's on page 53 in chapter 3, and so chapter 3, the title for chapter 3 is "You Can Be Trusted with Your Business." And the interesting thing about this chapter is that it was going to be something completely different, and I kept trying to write it, and it kept coming out crap. And Holly, my wife, was just like, "This is crap." I'm like, "This is crap," and and then I said, like, I'm wondering what really wants to be written here, and this is what came out. And it's actually been it's been one of the more profound themes that I've been walking with and teaching and working with clients with over the last year or more than a year. So I'm glad it came through. Thank you. Ya Allah. And so this is a section within that chapter, and the subtitle of this section is "A Misunderstood Spiritual Teaching About Trust." There is a spiritual teaching that says everything is from the divine. This teaching is often misunderstood and at times misused in quite harmful ways. According to the Sufis and many other spiritual paths, the origin of everything that exists is the source, the oneness, what some call the divine or God. This reality of everything arising from the divine is both the reason why we can trust ourselves deeply and the reason we need a lot of nuance in how we apply that trust. Because we've been trained by modern culture to categorize things as other, it's challenging to really get that the divine is not an external being, not a so-called beard in the sky. The source of all cannot be a thing among things. Otherwise, it would not be the source of all things. We ourselves are expressions of the divine source, and yet we do not comprise the entirety of source. I want to explain the two broad ways that people have divine experiences, that we can understand their roles in a nuanced trusting of ourselves. The two ways that we tend to experience divine presence are immanence and transcendence. Immanent means experiencing the divine within. It's feeling that profound sense of love in your own heart. It's inwardly knowing you aren't separate in any way, and there are vast worlds within. Transcendent means experiencing the divine coming to you from outside or descending into or onto you. Here you feel held or carried or loved or taught or guided or empowered or inspired by an external divine source. Theologians sometimes argue about whether the divine is transcendent or immanent. But people who have experienced these states know they both contain truth. According to the Sufis, nothing exists without the divine presence. The source is a reality that interpenetrates everything, that is all of time and space, and also outside time and space. We can taste or perceive that reality in our own hearts, and it is wondrous. People who have had extended experiences of divine immanence and transcendence say it's life changing. They know that love is available everywhere, and there is a deep trust and peace that lives within them. There are times when we look within ourselves to find that presence, to find it arising out of our own heart. Then we come to know without a doubt that we do carry the love within. There are also times when we're feeling small and separate, disconnected. The reconnection to love can then sometimes feel as if the divine is descending on us, coming to us from outside, as the illusion of separation melts and we reconnect. The thoughts and reactions we have arise from these same places within, from a divine source. That carries an inherent trustworthiness with it. However, because our perceptions can become tangled or difficult to interpret due to our experience of disconnection, the initial understanding of any thought or reaction that arises can't necessarily be taken at face value. I love both the immanent and the transcendent. I'm all in favor of you having as many ways to the divine as possible, of knowing that every path leads to the source of love. When one says everything is from the divine, it means that the origin of everything's existence is this source, and that the divine can be accessed everywhere. Sometimes we perceive it as arising internally, sometimes we perceive it as arriving from elsewhere. The reality is that it's already there, and it's our perception that is changing, opening, widening, deepening to perceive it. This is what I mean when I say you can trust everything that arises within you, that everything is worth listening to more deeply. Our client, this references a story that was brought up earlier in the chapter. Our client who had conflicting feelings about collaboration is a great example of this. She wanted to collaborate, and her instincts to collaborate were arising from wisdom. But her desire to collaborate with this person had cautions with it, and she needed to listen to those.
Hmm. There's a lot in there. Hmm.
There's a lot in there. There's
Mhm.
a lot in there.
Um, yeah, where do I even begin? Yeah, there's a lot in there. Um, one of the things that I was also really taken by in your book is just the emphasis on love, that, and it's not just like you have to love your clients, which is something that is taught, emphasized in some heart-centered business practices and stuff, but that like everything emanates from love, which is not something that you typically hear in a business oriented training or book. And it's not something that you hear even in society really at all, you know. And so I'm wondering how it feels in your body, in your mind, in your spirit to like come at all of this from a place of love.
It's said, the Sufis say that if all the oceans were ink and all the trees were pens, and you wrote until the trees were done and the oceans were dry, you still can't explain what a drop of water tastes like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've all had experiences of love. And I think what gets missed sometimes in our culture is that there are a lot, is that love is, I kind of referenced it in the earlier reading, is that love is not just one thing. Love is many, 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 many different things. And uh, according to the Sufis, love is not an emotion. It's a divine quality. It's something that we can receive and fill up with and express, and it can take many, many, many forms. It's like if I think of my kids, we have teen boys, twins. Um, when they were younger, one expression of love is to scoop them up and give them big hugs and cuddles. And another expression of love is like, no, you can't have three, donuts for breakfast because you'll be a raging monster. It's like that's an expression of love also. Like there are many, many, many ways that love is expressed. And so I think, when we talk about developing a business from love and it's like I'm focusing on some of these spiritual experiential pieces in the book, but it gets very, I mean, you can speak to this also, Eryka, like it gets very, we talk about the stages of business development. We talk about the different elements that are needed for a business to succeed. We talk about marketing. There's a lot of practical pieces here. And um, we have to remember, I think it's imperative for us to remember that whenever we come to something practical, that the origin of it is love and that the proper expression of it is love. I was talking with someone earlier who was working with their marketing. They're a very spiritual person, a spiritual teacher. And, it's like, and I was suggesting to them that they needed to let go of like a marketing framework and instead to think of themselves as extending care to people.
Mm.
And that the marketing is about really just about extended care, not about how like getting sales or, and it's a very, I mean, it's just, it's a very important, it's a very important piece. And I think that if I kind of circle back around to this trusting yourself and everything arises from love, like everything comes from the divine, that is not an invitation to be collapsed. Oh, look, this person's doing something terrible. Well, that's from the divine, so we just have to accept it. We are also from the divine. And when something is going on, what arises in us? What divine qualities arise in us? Like, does the quality of justice arise? Does the quality of care arise? Does the quality of protection, in terms of like maybe a vulnerable populations being targeted, is there a quality of friendship that's arising? And we can see that something can arise from love and it can become distorted in the physical world. So, like there can be in someone who's doing something horrible and like they're having a deep need for connection, for witnessing, for care. But because, especially for us as white people, our indigeneity has been taken from us by the trade that are, by force and by our choices our ancestors made, and not always choices that were given to them. Like that deep need for belonging and for groundedness and for care doesn't feel like it can be met or even named. And so it comes out in a deep rage. And then people start doing harm. So there's like a kernel of love and care and yearning at the heart of it, but it gets distorted. And if my response is to fight with them, that's not the love. I can still take action to stop destruction, but it needs to come from love. In business, if survival is running us and we're coming from fear and oh my God, I've got to get clients, while we're wanted, there's like a deep yearning for safety. There's a deep yearning for care. There's a deep yearning for, witnessing and appreciation, perhaps. And if we can connect with those deeper needs, then our expressions of marketing doesn't come from this place of, oh my goodness, I have to get money from you so I can survive. But instead, it can come from a more solid place of love and care and generosity that,
Mhm.
by the way, is more effective in creating sustainable relationships with people.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. It's like the way it resonates with me and in the work that I do on mindset is that coming from a place of love and abundance rather than fear and scarcity. Um, so I did have a question, and I don't know how it's going to land. So if you don't want to engage with it, that's fine. Um, not everyone is spiritual or describes themselves as spiritual. Some are questioning, some are
Right.
agnostic, some are atheists, and
Yes.
some come from different religious traditions. I'm wondering how you work with people who come from a different spiritual or no spiritual tradition, and how you feel they would engage with the book.
I think it's a great question. And I have yet in years and years and years and years to come across a question that I wasn't happy to engage with. So if it's coming from a sincere place, right? So thank you. Thanks for being willing to ask. So, Heart of Business was born back in 2001 when I was in the middle of my Sufi healership training. And I, and that's a whole story. But it came out, and I made the choice long ago that I I like my job is not to introduce people to spirituality who weren't spiritual, because I have there's not a drop of evangelical anything in my body. I was raised Jewish, and it's like if you've ever looked at Judaism, it is very hard to convert to Judaism. It takes a year of hard work, and maybe people, maybe you can become Jewish. And so it's like that's like I'm like the opposite of evangelical um,
Hmm.
in my in my upbringing and standing. And so I I'm like, I'm coming from a very spiritual perspective. I want to work with, like those are the people that I'm happy to talk to. If you're not spiritual and you don't have a spiritual belief or perspective, that's awesome. There are other people to work with. There's so many people who are doing really good work in the world of business, and many of them are not explicitly spiritual. And so I support people finding the place where they can learn easiest, so that they don't have to struggle or translate too much. So, uh, because I love that. There's so many different paths and ways of moving in the world. In terms of how do we work with people from different spiritual traditions, I come from an interfaith understanding that when we stand strongly in who we are, then there's room for other people to be who they are. And so by being really explicit about the Sufi Islamic lineage that I'm practicing within, then it makes space. And we have had people from so many different traditions work with us. Many, like all of the major religions, a lot of minor religions, a lot of people who don't have any, set path at all, or there's people who are working with individual spiritual teachers. There's so many different ways to walk the path of love. And uh, Islam says, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's something I used to remember, but it's that anyway, that there are like over 200,000 prophets sent to every people and every time, bringing the message of love and unity. And I really believe that, like there's not just there's one message, but there's not just one path of that message. And so I've had Buddhist priests, I've had people who are like, I wonder, like, I know there's something, but I don't know what it is. I've had Reiki masters, I've had Catholic, we've had nuns, we've had rabbis, we've had, other people from many, many different paths. And uh, and no one has cursed me out yet. Like they all seem to um, find their way with what we're doing. You're muted.
Oops. Thank you for engaging with that question. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, can ask any question. I am an open book. I don't, and I appreciate challenging questions. It's important to
Oh,
be
my
able
inner
to,
fifth grader is like, don't say
well,
that.
well, Mom, but I mean, especially in the realm of spirit, like, okay, I'm, cis middle-aged white guy in a position of spiritual leadership and teachership. And the conflation of like organizational leadership and spiritual authority is like one of the most toxic, like things go bad very quickly in this realm. And there's a book that my sheikh wrote out of he was a teacher at the Al-Aqsa Masjid in Jerusalem, little cute Palestinian man who passed some years ago. And he would come to the US for a month at a time. We get to sit with him. But there's a book he wrote that there's one chapter that I cling to that shows all of these examples of leaders within the Islamic tradition who were challenged by just normal, regular people, you know, men, women, kids, and in many cases, the leaders being in tears of gratitude that people didn't feel so awed by the leadership, but that they could just say, hey, what you're doing isn't right, or that's not right, or you've got it wrong. And to have that kind of empowerment within each person is so important because we do need leadership. There are moments and times and places where someone has the experience or the wisdom or just the oomph or just like the guidance or what have you. And it's really helpful to lean into someone's guidance, but that cannot, if that becomes too calcified or we begin to ascribe some other worldly power to that moment, like that's dangerous. And so I'm, please, Rana, I hope could attest to this, that, you can challenge me on anything. And if I've mess up, I'm happy to apologize.
Hmm. Um, well, so I do want to be mindful of time. I mean, I have a whole bunch of questions, and I know that you wanted to read another excerpt.
If we get to it, sure. Um, but if there are questions and if anybody who's here has questions or
Yeah, let's open it up. And if you do need a moment to think of a question, I will ask a selfish question, which is so this is more concretely about marketing, where you talk about like the one compelling sentence that
Mhm.
I guess that would be, commonly known as your elevator pitch, but not as, irritating. Um, so as you probably have gleaned, I'm very multi-passionate. And so creating that one compelling sentence, that narrative has been something that has stymied me for the entire time that I've had my business, which has been like decades. Um, and so you do address that briefly, but I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit more.
Sure. It's a big question. So can you tell me about some of when you say multi-passionate, what are some of the different things you
I
like to
mean,
do?
I coach on like 12 different things at least. I mean, it's
What
all,
are can you name some of them?
yeah, I work with people on money. I work with people on confidence and visibility. I work with people on limiting beliefs and fears, um, identifying desires and dreams. I mean, I recognize as I say this that they all kind of like that falls into under an
Yes.
umbrella. But then
Yes.
there's the landscape photography, there's
Yes.
the um,
Right.
trauma training, and
Right.
the body positive, like under the Milky Way, in the ocean stuff. And
Yeah.
so, it's like
S-
I make the world better.
Right. So what you're doing right now is you're defining your business by what you do,
Uh-huh. Okay.
and I don't recommend that.
Okay.
Let me explain. So for me, a business is defined not by what we do, it's by who we're helping and what challenge are they faced with that we're helping them with. So, I think that the landscape photography aside, all the things that you talked about in terms of coaching and in terms of body positive stuff, I mean, you could find an audience and a challenge that all of that would be in service to them,
That's true.
you know?
Hmm.
Um, I don't think so, I I was raised in retail. My grandfather was a pharmacist during Prohibition in the United States when alcohol was illegal, and then he sold alcohol by prescription. And when Prohibition was over, um, they he opened a wine store, and then my parents ran that store and eventually retired from it. And when they got a new bottle of wine in, they didn't open a new store, they just put it up on a shelf because it was serving the same clientele. I know it's kind of an absurd example, but I think that we make it more complicated than it is. I think that there is some choice that needs to be made. Let me say it differently. You don't have to
Yeah, I
do
don't
it the
like
way
that.
I suggest it. What? You
No,
don't
I will
have
not make a choice.
you don't have to do it the way that I suggest. It's going to just make it easier.
Okay.
So you can have as many different interests as you like, and it's going to be really challenging to market it if you're not having a conversation with the same group of people. Now, I think that the landscape photography and the rest of what we discussed sound like two separate businesses. They
Mhm.
sound like two separate, and that's fine. That's fine. Just know that it takes work to run a business and to run more than one business, each with its own marketing channels and own everything. It just becomes more challenging. Now, I have seen people get very creative and bring artistic talents to use within um, uh, within service businesses. So for instance, I know someone who was a songwriter and a musician and also did coaching and transformational work, and eventually kind of came up with, like, what, I can hear somebody's issues and then I can make a custom song for them that speaks to what their heart's needing. I could see you creating a package and, like, well, what's their heart needing? I'll take a picture that helps ground them and remind them in body positivity and the mindset that they're wanting. And it's like you can weave these things together in beautiful ways. um
I love that.
so yeah, yeah.
Um, Thank you. And I should probably like hire you and we can talk more about this one-on-one. Um, we have a question-ish in the chat. So Jen says, not fully formed question. I love the idea of business being more about serving from love, and that's what my mission is. And my ideal client is healthcare systems, organizations, foundations, nonprofits. They most likely don't operate fully from love, and the ultimate end user are family caregivers of patients with chronic illness. What's a way to show up fully from my space of love and service when they make many decisions from the bottom line and return on investment?
Yes,
I'm assuming that that's what you mean by ROI.
yes. um so let me say something here, because it's a great question. And I think a lot of what we do, and this is a perfectly natural way to ask a question like this. And in the book, God, which chapter is that in? There's a exercise around untangling one knot. And what I think is that the more, oh yeah, here it is on page 23, untangling one knot, about healing your relationship with business and healing issues. When you have a situation like this, you are going to find your way through, and I invite you to ask the question again by getting very specific. Okay, here's one situation that one of my clients had, and this is the decision they were making, and this is what I was supposed to do. How do I show up in love in this situation? How do I show up fully in love in this situation? The more that we can bring it into the very specific place and then find our way through in that specific place, uh, something gets healed in us. There's like a groove, there's a pathway that's formed in our heart. There's a learning, there's an untangling of the knot that happens. When we try to come up with a generalized question of, like, how can I do this always? What's the general approach to do this? We end up intellectualizing. We end up distancing ourselves from the raw emotion that's involved. We end up missing the details of what's involved. And I find that healing is very much in the details. It's very much in the individual circumstance. So if you were to ask that question again, saying, this is in this one situation, how do I work through it? I am certain from long experience that there is a way through. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know yet, right? Presence and trust. And then you do that enough times and enough of those knots are loosened, and then it just becomes much easier to meet each time it comes up, easier and easier and easier and easier until finally you're in a fluid place with it.
That's beautiful.
Excellent.
Um, I think I forgot to say at the beginning that I'm also a social worker. And I founded a nonprofit and I now work in geriatric social work. And if I might add something to that, if that's okay, like I think that um, most people initially go into healthcare, nonprofit, social service, foundations. Maybe not the like super rich people who start the foundation because they want the tax break, but like the people who work, but okay, all right, fine. Limiting belief about money uncovered. There we go. Um, like there is love there. And like you were saying earlier, Mark, like sometimes that love gets distorted by any number of factors, like, like having to file the 990 PF and like having to account for, and justify what you're spending a foundation's money on. So, I mean, maybe there's like the question that you ask at the beginning of the book is like, what is the love that's available? And
Is
finding
love available even
is love
there?
available?
Yes.
Sorry, is love
Yeah,
available
yeah.
here? Like what is the love, Jen, that's available that you can like kind of tease out and remind yourself of like these people are coming from love and they're just like going about it in kind of an annoying way right now.
And there are limits, right? Like I was saying before with my example with my kids, no, you cannot have 3 donuts. At this point, they're 16. They can have as many. I don't control their donuts anymore, but it's like, so, not like I could. They're taller than I am. But anyway, that's a different topic. But the sometimes the love that's available guides us to say, you know what, I can't do this with them. Like it's just there's not the pathway through it sends me in a different direction, or I draw a limit, or I'm like, okay, so like it's not it's not like, how do I want to say this? More often than we think, there are miraculous ways through where love creates a path where we thought there wasn't. And even with that, there are sometimes situations where love is asking us to stand strong for something and draw a boundary or draw a limit or, stand in opposition to something. And that's why we have to be discerning. That's why we have to be listening. Like that's one of the themes in the book is like, we're going to run into these distortions all the time because that's the world. The world is a distortion of the essence, and I don't mean that. That sounded bad. The world is a beautiful creation of divine presence, and it is sacred in so many ways, and it is not inferior to anything. But our witnessing of the truth and the love and the oneness gets distorted, and we have trouble witnessing it. And this, and that's what we're being asked to do, is to learn to witness love and to find love where it already is. We're not bringing love into business. We're discovering the love that's already there and making it as visible as possible.
Mm. Mm, damn. That was a much more beautiful way of saying what I was trying to say before. um, thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Jen, for that really great question. Are there any other questions? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat.
I also want to say that I, although I love seeing people's faces, one of the, Rana knows this because she's in our community, one of the rules in our or ground rules in our learning community is that you choose how you want to show up. You can arrive late, you can leave early, you don't have to turn your camera on. Um, I'm very explicit about that because it's so important that it's not about me. You know, as the teacher, it's like if you're wanting to learn, you have to make yourself as comfortable as possible in order to do that learning. And there are people who say, you know what, I need to turn my camera on because it's about me. I need to be seen in this moment, or I want to show up. And I honor that, but I never want somebody to overrun their own desires or their own needs or their own truth to show up differently than that. And so I'm just really wanting to honor that everybody's choosing to keep their camera off, you know, except for me and Eryka. I'm just really, that speaks to me of a tremendous amount of empowerment
Hmm.
among you all, and I'm celebrating that.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's usually something that I say at the beginning of my courses and stuff, and I forgot to say it here. So thank you for bringing that out. And I'm so glad that everybody feels safe and comfortable doing what feels right for them. Um, let's see. Well, so Mark, how how can people find you?
Heartofbusiness.com is the most direct route. Um, you can follow us on Facebook or newly on Instagram because we're late adopters sometimes, or on LinkedIn. Um, and but being on our email list is probably, you know, it's like that way you're not dependent on the algorithm. It just comes to you. And Rhonda put up a link to the book. Thank you. If in the US at bookshop.org, independent supports independent booksellers. Um, uh,
Oh,
yeah, you know, um, uh, I, I love this work. It's so important to me that small business owners feel empowered, you know, and feel strengthened and bring their gifts forward. You know, healing in the realm of business is certainly not everything that's needed. We need so much more in this world of ours, but it's an aspect of what's needed. And if you want to walk this path with us, I love it. You know,
mhm.
you've gotten a if you're unfamiliar with me, this is your first taste, you know, get on our email list or buy the book. Buy the book. Yeah, not art of business, heart of business. There's a
Oh,
small
sorry
typo
about
in the
that.
link there. There
Sorry.
probably is an art of business, but I don't know it. um
God, it's probably like Donald Trump's or something. Ugh.
oh God forbid. um
Sorry.
um so I want to say that yeah, you know, take your time, get to know, see if we're, you know, it's easy to show up on a call like this and sound nice, oh yeah, he's saying the right things, you know, but people follow us for sometimes for years before they buy anything, or they just take their time getting to know, like, is there something really solid here? And I just encourage you, if you feel like jumping in, you're more than welcome to jump in with anything we offer. But if you're cautious, as many people are for good reason, take your time, just get to know us and see if there's some solidity there that matches your heart.
Mm, I love that. Thank you so much, Mark. I just want to double check and see if anybody has any questions that really want to be asked, and if you would prefer to chat me privately that I can read for you anonymously, that's okay. Um, and by the way, I did just check Art of Business and it like goes to some hair extension website, so interesting. But
That's so so wild. I ended up with heartofbusiness.com because at the time, this was back in 2001, I guess. Um, uh, MarkSilver.com was an erotic photographer in Seattle, which is great and not my brand, like a different person doing something else. So so I ended up with Heart of Business kind of accidentally, and it's been a blessing. So
Oh, well, I just checked that too, because, but it seems to be available.
nice. Thank
Anyway,
you, Jen. That's very sweet.
yeah. Well, I want to thank Mark so much for your time, your energy here, your energy in writing this incredible book. Um, yeah, if you haven't gotten it yet and you haven't read it, please do. It's excellent. And I know I included an Amazon, an Evil Empire link in the reminder emails, but I will be putting the bookshop.org link in for, so please support the independent bookstore of your choice or that one rather than the Evil Empire. Um, and you can find Mark at heartofbusiness.com. You can find me at eryka.com, ERYKA.com. And I'm so grateful to all of you for being part of this experiment with me. If you have
Me too.
any constructive feedback or, any feedback at all, it doesn't have to actually be constructive. That's okay. Um, and if you have a book that you would like to chat with me about, Rana, is your book yet? Is your book done yet? Please let me know. And, uh, I wish you success with your success and love and all the things that you desire in your life and business. um, yeah, thank you so much. Mark, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you.
Eryka, likewise, deeply grateful for this space. Thank you so much.
I hope you do more so more people
Me
know
too.
about your
Me too.
book. All right, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll send replay and all that info probably tomorrow. Let's be real. Enjoy your days, everyone. Mwah.
Mwah.